Hi, I'm Tim Zacharias with Cougar USA and your host of Building Value. On today's episode, my guest is Patrick Verwys with Triple Clear. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
I really appreciate you having us.
All right. Well, I'm really excited about today's episode. Really covered a lot, or going to cover a lot on today's episode. We're going to be looking at the history of Triple Clear and how Patrick got into the industry. Also going to be talking about the force field filtration technology and how COVID-19 impacts water quality in commercial buildings. On Building Value, we go behind the scenes at some of the most iconic buildings in Texas to showcase the incredible people that design, build, and maintain them and their impact on the community. Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about the beginnings of Triple Clear and why you made that jump?
Oh, sure.
That's a great story.
I think I personally love the story because it's mine.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you the beginnings of Triple Clear really start with Andrew Borden. And not to take anything away from the amount of energy and effort that he and Eric put in together, everybody needs a dreamer, and I think if you get the opportunity to know more about us and certainly anybody out there gets the opportunity to meet Andrew and Eric, they are two of the most brilliant people that I've come across in my life. And the beauty of their relationship is they're completely opposite. And so Andrew is this really big thinking, highly networked, extremely successful, brilliantly smart, quick thinking human. And Eric is a very calculating, very brilliant, trained, and seasoned CEO. And together they're really powerful combination. So ultimately they, after a number of years of Andrew traveling the world in other businesses and spending, half his life in hotels, he really felt like there needed to be a company. There needed to be someone to help bring really good ideas to this industry. And ultimately, Andrew set out with this dream of eliminating water bottles in hotels. It just was as simple as the fact that every time he checked into a hotel, there was 2 water bottles sitting there. Mm-hmm. And he would drink them and throw them in the trash. Yep. And the more he traveled and the more people he met, the more he realized that water is a great equalizer, regardless of your social economic status, where you grew up, your race, your religion, your creed. You need water to survive. And ultimately, it was a limited resource. Obviously, from a business standpoint, it's an enormous industry. And so he slowly started doing some research on his own and realized that there hadn't been any real breakthroughs. And as he continued to do some research, he realized that there was a lot of really good ideas out there, brilliant ideas. And so we use the term commercialization. So what does that mean? It means that really what we set out to do is help people commercialize great technologies, great ideas, and make them available so that we can actually help people. So anyway, Eric and Andrew finally decided to form Triple Clear. And this is where the story gets a little interesting. I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur, always wanted to have my own business, and certainly felt like Eric, who was a close friend of mine at the time and mentor, like I mentioned, would be a really good influencer, someone that could really kind of help me in that path. So anyway, long story longer, Eric and Andrew started Triple Clear, and I was having a conversation with Eric. I hadn't met Andrew yet, and I'd known Eric at that time. I probably knew Eric about 10, 11 years. And he told me about this amazing technology and a company that they were going to acquire out of France that, that had this media. It was, we called it pellets, but really it was, it was a loose media that was amazing at capturing and killing Legionella, and started telling me about, this, all the issues with water around the world. Mm-hmm. And immediately, look, at that time, I'm in my early 30s, and when you go to Mexico, don't drink the water, don't put ice in your drinks. And so he's telling me things, and it makes sense that, we're lucky where we live in the United States that you can turn on the tap and drink the water and not have an issue, right? And so anyway, fast forward, we begin the conversations. I meet Andrew in 2014, and we hit it off. In the beginning, I was a little concerned because it's like you have this perfect mix and where do you fit in? And obviously we've been able to work through all that because I'm definitely a combination of the two of them. Obviously without the super intelligent part, just the average guy who likes to work hard. But ultimately, along that way, two critical things happened that set us on our path. Ultimately, Andrew randomly met one of the principals of GA Fleet, which is a distributor like Cougar that handles the New York market,
Mhm.
that really took an affinity to the vision that Triple Clear had at the time. We didn't have any products, we didn't have any sales, distribution, manufacturing. We were really just a company with a good idea, and the IP seemed really special. And then the second part, which was really magical, was Andrew was traveling to Miami to do some due diligence on the company we were acquiring with the South American partner, and happened to sit next to, on his flight, one of the executives from Starwood. And that is a critical point in Triple Clear's story, because ultimately the gentleman was flying to Miami to look at a property that they were going to acquire and turn into the first one hotel. And their vision was to be the most socially sustainable hotel chain on the planet. And through that, they wanted to eliminate water bottles.
Of course.
So you could
Yeah.
imagine, big thinking executives sitting next to each other going, hey, I'm about to buy this company out of France and bring to the United States this technology that is so special that it makes potable water safe consistently, blah, 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 right? And oh my God, I'm trying to start a hotel chain where we're going to market these critical, long, big thinking ideas. And so that partnership was formed. And that's when I started the change from, hey, this is a really cool idea that I'm watching from the outside, to actively being involved in the future of Triple Clear. And then the story takes an interesting turn for the worse. And so this one, I think, for all the engineers I've already met in Houston and around the US, this is the part of the story I think you appreciate the most, because there's nothing like an outsider without an engineering degree, who thinks he knows everything, who comes in and fails miserably at something that you know a lot about, right? Like, that's where these things always come together. And that's what happened to us. And so what we learned early on with our partnership with Starwood, it was a 600-room hotel right on the beach in South Beach. I mean, a beautiful facility if anybody has a chance to come down and see it. There is a successful story at the end, so don't worry. But ultimately, what happened to us is we learned the valuable lesson that lab data, seeing something work in a controlled environment is catastrophically, and I mean catastrophically, different than getting it to work in a commercial setting, in a pump room at 400 gallons per minute, feeding 80 to 120 pounds of pressure to a hotel that might be at max occupancy. And so what happened to us was pretty normal, right? We failed and failed miserably. And what happened was we had to adapt to survive. And so that technology ultimately never grew past that initial trial. But through the process, we were able to meet the team that manufactures our force field media, which is what you hear us talk about all the time. And we were able to meet Alan LaPointe, who is the owner of our factory, and form some really tight strategic partnerships with folks like Cougar with incredible engineering backgrounds and real life experience, to then take a step back, spend about 2.5 years and a ton of money to engineer a product that is consistent, reliable. And so ultimately today, we were able to solve that problem, which then Starwood was absorbed, or they actually, I shouldn't say absorbed, but they sold their brands. The development group that owned Starwood sold their brands off to Marriott. We were able to meet the engineering team at Marriott. And, as of the end of February, are now the brand standard for all 30 brands globally for Marriott. So that's ultimately our path. And along the way, the other thing that I would say, Tim, that happened, which I think is fun for us, is that when we continue to, I call it exercise, right? So when we continue to exercise the power of force field and understand what this really unique media is able to accomplish in an everyday environment, something that we're all around all the time, we get challenged by our partners to do other things. And so, We started with this dream of safe and delicious water for hotels, but now we're filtering mission critical water for Children's Hospital of Philadelphia
Mm-hmm.
and their 15-year plan for every building in 4 critical areas. And then the one I think is the funniest personally, is that we've got reclaim systems now where we're reclaiming retort water from a Hormel plant where we're producing spam and reusing it for boiler makeup,
Mm-hmm.
taking somewhere around 30 million gallons of water off the infrastructure per year per plant. So
Yeah.
these are the things that we're able to do, all because Andrew had this, at the time, crazy idea to say, look, it's not that I don't want to pay for the water bottle. It's not that I don't need the water bottle. It's just there should be a better way, and nobody's putting their energy behind it.
Well, I love that
How's that for
story,
an
and
answer?
no, it's great. I love it. The big vision and goal of that end goal of creating a better product that would fix part of that water problem. And it's sometimes it takes people from the outside to see it differently and to bring it to market, like you said. And when you look at the water and energy nexus and the amount of energy and water it takes to just produce power and to produce drinking water, and then at the end of the line to process that wastewater, so to take away parts of that all the way down the chain is really significant. I mean, it's much more than just the the amount of water saved in creating that bottled water. I mean, I think in the city of Houston, they make somewhere, I think it's around 500 million gallons of water a day, potable drinking water. And I think 60% of that goes to industrial uses, right? And
Which is
including bottling water, which is
exactly, I was just going to say that, and making
insane.
ice.
Yep.
You've got ice plants in Houston, and I tell you, it's another challenge. So no different than the challenge Hormel threw at us, or we produce mission critical water for
Hmm.
all of those syrups that go in Starbucks drinks, and the funniest thing is we make hot sauce for Kentucky Fried. Our water,
There
shouldn't
you
say we
go.
make it, but we've got processed water that is making the hot sauce that goes on your chicken wings and all these things where you think about it, it's like, well, why not, right? And I think that, to your point a second ago, I think that's where our company has really helped the partners that we've worked with to date, which is rather than tell you all the reasons why you shouldn't do something the way you do, is really try to listen, saying, okay, well, why can't we? And if we can come up with that solution, is it something that has an ROI, whether it be that ROI be something like Starwood was concerned about, which is I want to be able to market a new brand, a fresh
Hmm.
way of doing business. Or is it an ROI like Hormel's looking at, which is saying, look, we want to put a piece of equipment in because we know as a company, we're just dumping. Because at the time, up until us, that water was just put in retention ponds and then put in a river. So ultimately, the water ends up back in the ecosystem, right? But to your point, think of the demand on those municipalities. And when you look
It's
at these
massive.
plants, it's all rural communities. And so being able to help rural communities, which then can repurpose that attention for maybe agriculture, which is up in Wisconsin, their primary focus, right? They want to be able to repurpose that water or that demand on the ecosystem, on the infrastructure, so that they can help our farmers who are obviously trying to reinvent the way that they grow with, today's environment and global food demands. So it's a pretty cool domino effect when you
Sure.
think about it. And ultimately, the idea that there's really smart people with really creative ideas that need help taking that idea and making it into something. That's where Eric and Andrew, I think, are really brilliant in terms of how they've set Triple Clear up as a business model.
Yeah, it is a really cool story, and for me personally too. You mentioned making hot sauce for KFC and all these cool things, but for me it was making formula for my kids, and I know you did the same. But we didn't have to buy the nursery water or anything like that. We just
Yeah,
filled it up with the Triple Clear and felt confident that baby Joey had everything he needed there. So
it's important. It's
it
peace of mind, and it's
yeah.
also just at the end of the day, I think, look, we all recycle now, right? And if you, my dad, again, I talk about my dad a lot, right? I think my parents are really forward thinkers, but they're still in their early 70s. And I remember being a kid and then being like, why in the world are we doing this? Like, I have to start, separating my garbage. Like, it was foreign to them. But
Yeah.
I would tell you, that same 74-year-old father of mine, like, wouldn't dream of not recycling, like, because he gets it. He sees that the world came together, and we made it something, so it became their everyday part of life. And I think the same is going to happen for plastic and water bottles, and just giving people an opportunity to once again confidently drink out of their sinks, taps,
Yeah.
hotel rooms.
Yeah, and I know Marriott is definitely forward thinking in some of the brands that they're doing with the sustainability, but I think more and more you're going to see buildings in general move to that, because it can be a win-win for everyone. You have the sustainable products that are going to save them energy and water, but it's also in a lot of ways going to deliver a better product into the building, and ultimately save their bottom line too when they're saving uh, on energy and water costs. So
Take it a step further too, Tim. You're starting to see it, right? Not universally all over the United States, but you're starting to see it in pockets where the pressure is actually coming from the bottom up,
yep.
because you've got, I like to say we're old. I know we're similar in age. I'm a little older than you, right? But we're that magic generation that's a bridge, right? But the generation that's younger than us, they have no issues carrying a Yeti with them when they leave in the morning to go to work. They have no issues getting up from their desk, and bringing their Yeti with them when they go to the men's room, or go to the kitchen to grab lunch, and want a place to fill up, right? Because
Sure.
they don't want, they're not in a position where they want to go into a commissary and see a refrigerator filled with 30 bottles of plastic water.
Right.
It's their mindset. It's starting to become their expectation. And then you layer on top of it what we're seeing in primary and secondary schools right now, with this transition to, from a water fountain to a bottle filler.
Hmm.
I think it's been a quiet transition, but it's been a transition that is going to absolutely carry forward as we head into obviously higher education, but more importantly, Class A office space. Kids are going to be
Hmm.
used to and confident that, hey, you know what? I can go to the bottle filler and get clean, filtered, safe, delicious water.
Yep. Mikey, our 6-year-old, he takes his water bottle with all the other kids. They have a spot for it, and right across his classroom
Yep.
is a bottle filler. So yeah, they're definitely grown up with that for sure. So what is it about the force field technology that is allowing all of this, all these great applications that we've been talking about?
Sure. So it all comes back to I get a little sciencey on you.
Sure.
Again, I'm not a sciencey geek, but I'm a tech geek, and I kind of was born out of that tech industry. Um, Ultimately, what it comes back down to is a principle called electroadhesion, which is just a fancy way to say that opposites attract. And so our media, which I brought along for you today, looks as
Love it.
simple as a sheet of paper. And for all the engineers I've worked with, we pass it around. And certainly, if you guys have an opportunity to stop by Cougar's offices, they've got media there that you guys can touch and feel. But it looks and feels like a piece of paper. But the magic is that during the manufacturing process, through a chemical reaction, we're able to replicate the natural properties of an element. And that element has two things that are critical to it. The first is that it's positively charged. But listen, there's a lot of elements that are positively charged. So that's not what's really making it special for this application. The part of that element's properties that are so special is it has a high surface charge. So in other words, all of those uh, protons are on the outside of the actual element. But when it comes in contact with water, it slowly relaxes. So the example I use all the time is a loaf of bread. So as we all understand surface area, right? If we had a loaf of bread, we could calculate the amount of surface area there around the outside. But is that how we eat a sandwich? No. What we do is we slice the bread up. Why? Increases the surface area, right? So it's the same amount of matter, right? But the surface area is exponentially increased. So when our
Hmm.
media comes in contact with water, those fibers slowly relax. As those fibers slowly relax, the surface area increases. So what you end up with is a media, right? So the water flows straight through the media, right? So it becomes an exercise of surface area that when it comes in contact with that water, right, it creates a strong positive charge, which then is able to adhere or grab out of the water any of those negatively charged particles. More importantly, and why it makes so much sense for Andrew's vision and where we started in the hospitality space, is that the majority of our bacteria, virus, and cysts, not all of them, but the majority of those invisible, very small, very harmful things to the human body happen to be negatively charged. So it's extremely effective at removing them. So what you end up with is this combination of three things. The media itself has three things all working together. Electroadhesion, like I mentioned, which will grab and adhere, so bonding at the actual media level, those negatively charged things. And then it's also a 1 micron mechanical filter, so it's naturally going to absorb anything that is particulate size 1 micron or larger. And then the other thing is that we can impregnate it with activated carbon. So we're able to then take care of absorbing things that might be organic or higher levels of metal. So you put those three things together and you have a simple mechanical filter that doesn't need any electricity. We're not introducing any outside chemicals. Quite frankly, it's got a built-in mechanical failsafe, right? Because of the surface area example I just gave you, it's going to start to raise in differential pressure or honestly start to clog, right? And so you don't have to have real expensive, on demand or real-time monitoring. You literally have something that you could put it in an application, measure differential pressure, and know it's effectively protecting a single sink in a hospital room or an entire building.
And it's effective until it's completely clogged, right? I mean, basically the filter will last as long as you can handle the pressure drop.
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, Tim, and I know you do as well. And so it's one that I know engineers love to try to trip me up on. And so as I've had thousands of conversations with engineers, I've learned to throw some disclaimers in there because they're again they're good at and enjoy tripping up a salesperson who starts out by saying he's not an engineer. But ultimately, the answer is yes. The media is tested all the way down to a clog. So it's all the way down to a drip. It's used in mission critical water for hospitals. It's used in survival grade camping equipment. You can go on out to a river in the Congo and pick up some water and know that if there's anything in that water that falls within the scope of what we take out, which is microbiologicals mostly, you could drink it safely and confidently. But the caveat that I've learned to throw in there is that when I put it in a building with triplex Grundfos pumps behind it, and all of a sudden the differential pressure starts to grow and that second pump kicks on, then the third pump kicks on, and we boost right through that media that yes, you'll blow end caps across, you'll blow holes in the media. And so ultimately we've set up very clear operating parameters. So our filters knew when you put them in your system, you'll see a DP of a little less than 3 PSI, 3 PSID. We recommend they get changed between 12 and 15, not to exceed 20. But as a pump guy, you know that eventually you could blow the roof off a hotel if you had the chance.
Right. Luckily, there's a lot of safety controls in place to prevent that from happening, right? But it is, definitely a possibility if you wanted to take it to that extreme, for sure.
Yeah,
And we're
I can tell
actually,
you, I haven't.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I can tell you, I have not been in a building yet where there's too little pump.
Yeah,
Nobody's
usually,
complaining that they don't have enough pump.
right. And we're definitely looking at some options on ways to uh, design around the code requirements in Houston where we have the storage tank and the atmospheric storage tank before the booster system, looking at ways to put that filtration system on the incoming water before going into the tank so that we are not operating after the booster system. I think that it's the answer that I typically give when people ask How long does the filter last? Unfortunately, it depends, right? And it depends on the quality of water, how much you're flowing, and again, how much of that pressure drop that you can take. But I mean, we've seen pretty good life out of these. I mean, I've had mine personally in my sink for almost 18 months now, with no issue. So it just
Yeah.
depends, right?
And I can assure you that our friends at Marriott put us through the ringer. You know, we're a young company who is very we're very much focused on really helping people. And so we welcome those challenges because we want to make sure that not the customer, not that we don't, yes, we want the customer experience to be great, but we really want to make sure that that system is put in place and it's used for what it's designed for, because that's the only way we're ultimately going to benefit people that are either your tenants or patients or guests. And so I'd tell you that so November was 2 years on the first Marriott hotel where we used point of use filters. So this little filter that we use, which is our under the sink model,
Hmm.
just comes with a couple of hoses. As part of our project with Marriott early on, we were designed and specified into a hotel in Illinois, and it has 96 guest rooms. And that building went online in November 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and we haven't changed a single filter. Um,
Yeah.
and so we've done a lot of testing with Northwestern University on like our bottle fillers.
Yep.
And the industry wants to say everything's worth 3,000 gallons. And so if you look at our literature, we're consistent with that because that's how the equipment is measuring when filters need to be changed. But ultimately, I can tell you that the independent consultant who's working on that Marriott project is confident that you'll see a year plus out of a bottle filler. And again, it goes back to the quality of water, right? So as an outsider, we look at it as the filters need to be changed because they're doing their job. As a person who might be operating a building, they'll answer their answer to that statement, or their comeback to me on that statement is, well, that's all well and good, but how do I budget? How do I put together a plan so I can operate this building? And we continue to get smarter, and we've got a lot of cool things we've built into our operational sequence in the last year and a half, some of which have been led by the great Mike Zacharias, as
Hmm.
Scott says, at Cougar.
Yep.
Um, in terms of how do we get smarter on our water quality during the design phase so that we could better predict or better fit into a maintenance cycle based off what the customer needs. But the nice thing, I guess, to kind of end that statement is, unlike those other technologies where it's 3,000 gallons, you should change them, it's 6 months or you should change it, our technology is really an exercise of surface area, and
Hmm.
we're able to measure that through differential pressure. And I know you guys have worked real hard in terms of taking that idea, putting some simple controls behind it, the vision of tying that into a BMS
Yep.
so that your building engineers can predict when they need to change their filters and ultimately make sure that it's not a fire drill. It's really just, okay, 2 weeks from now, John is good to come in at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday, and we could throw a system in bypass when the building is essentially sleeping, and take 20 minutes and change the filters out. We
Yep.
try to make it simple.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, we can easily do that with controls that tie into their building automation and give them that feedback of the differential pressure, either through a switch or the actual DP, like you said. So
Yeah,
let's talk about some of these applications in the buildings.
sure.
I think there's three main ones that we've looked at: the point of entry, the point of use, which you've mentioned a little bit, and then some of the hot water return applications. So I'd like to kind of break those down one at a time.
Sure. Well, I tell you that part of our evolution, and your company and the team in Houston in general, the community in Houston, has been a big part of the last 18 months of how we've, again, exercised force field, looked at ways to make it more applicable to our everyday lives. And the biggest thing I go back to was conversations with the team from Cougar and a couple of other of our distributors back in June of 2017. And the comment was pretty straightforward. It was, we appreciate and get how powerful force field is. There's nobody questioning that it's game changing, but not everybody wants delicious water. Not everybody needs delicious water. How can we take a step back, look inside at ourselves and say, okay, what are the core components? What are the factors that make it so special that we've all kind of fell in love with, right? And how do we then apply them to real everyday problems that we can't or we don't like the solution for, right? And I say that can or like specifically, Tim, because as you know, we can solve any problem, right? As engineers, we're excellent at solving problems, but sometimes that solution can be more complex than the problem or more expensive problem.
Sure.
So we really tried to take all those factors and put them together. And to your point, especially driven by our partners in medical, right, who are looking at what a total building management water program looks like, specifically focused on mitigating or limiting or putting control factors in for Legionella. How do we look at those pain points and exercise force field? And so the first one, which was obviously the first one because of where we came from in the hospitality space, or where we had started in the hospitality space, was point of entry. And we call that firewall filtration.
Yep.
And it's pretty straightforward, because as we started talking to folks, you know, they understand, they relate to the fact that we need to protect our computers, right? You know, it's been part of all of us. Like, we've grown up and it's like, don't want to get a virus, you know, don't want our servers to go down. But at the same point, I would argue that the amount of mechanical equipment, the cost of maintenance on the mechanical equipment versus that one server bank in a building is equal to or greater, right?
Sure.
And yet we're just letting it operate, you know? And then one of the things we have found is the maintenance or the treatment sometimes could be as harmful to the equipment as the problem they're trying to solve. And so one of the things that started down in Houston, which has been a big part of our focus in the last 18 months, is this combination of bacteria in the water, particulate in the water, and iron in the water. And those three things have been the focus point of where we are today, which is firewall filtration, being able to take the baseline or reset the water quality in your building. Not because you really want someone every day to walk into the sink in a lavatory on the 18th floor and say, wow, I really enjoyed drinking that water, and when I was done washing my hands, right? It's not realistic for a commercial office building, right?
Right.
But what's realistic is that we want to feed all of our mechanical equipment with clean, fresh, safe water for two critical reasons, right? One is you want the efficiency, right? You want the equipment running as efficient as possible. But two, one of the things that the technology does is, if you think about it, we limit the contributing factors to biofilm. So it's not that we are putting a residual in that's designed to kill biofilm, right? It's there already in a lot of these buildings. But there isn't an engineer I work with that doesn't agree that if we could limit, we can take away those contributing factors, especially when you look at it from a food source standpoint, right? Not to be gross, but bacteria needs food to survive, right? And so if we can take that food source away, at the same time, we're taking away the additional bacteria virus, right? That's in the water, really, really powerful to the overall efficiency of a building. So that's first and foremost firewall filtration. Now, when we look at the design of that firewall, we've got a lot of options, right? Because beyond force field, what we love to talk about, we're a full service water treatment company. So we now have filters that are really effective at removing iron. We've got filters that are really effective and inexpensive for taking out particulate. In a lot of our applications where we've got strong odors or high organics, you know, we could put carbon in as an individual filtration stage and really utilize an absorptive strength of carbon that's super powerful at what it does, but still put force field on the other side so that we're not letting any of that bacteria into the building. So you have a ton of flexibility once you get to the point where you say there's value in creating this firewall, resetting that baseline, but then to Mike's point, right, Mike Zacharias' point, that water is always going to be different. And so the nice thing is, if we spend more time at the point of design where we're analyzing that water, it's going to allow us to create a customized system, right? What does he say, semi-custom, right? Because you'll start to see consistencies in each region, right? And we're already starting to see that in Houston, right? But you'll see consistencies, but we'll be able to design a system for the building that is going to maximize either filter life or maximize the efficiency of the building and such. So anyway, that's the starting point of where we've really come a long way in the last 18 months of redefining the uses of force field for more of an everyday use. And that's the same, I would tell you, for universities, especially universities, where you've got these seasonal downtimes.
Hmm.
Not, take the COVID situation we're in right now separate, but you've got schools and universities that normally have a downtime, and that could create a challenge, especially for microbiological growth within the building. And force field being able to just simply ride that wave and deliver consistent result. Hospitals are a huge part of what we do now, where point of entry and helping them reset that baseline is critical for their CMS water management program. And then obviously hotels continue to be a strong part of what we do. So then if you think about it, right, it's always looking at it from a standpoint of health, safety, and efficiency, right? So if you're concerned about equipment, you might be worried about, safety and efficiency. If you're concerned about marketing, you might be concerned about, you know, it tasting great. And you see how these things all go together. But ultimately, I get asked the question all the time, well, point of entry is great, and I totally appreciate, and it's valid, your approach of resetting that baseline, but my building's 60 years old. What do I do? And so the nice thing is we've partnered with Fair Solutions, and we've got some processes that we could share with you in terms of a checklist on how to flush your building responsibly in different ways you can go about it. But there's still dead legs, right? There's still biofilm. There's still challenges. So the other answer would be point of use,
Right.
right? So the two ways, again, you're still creating a firewall. Do you want to create the firewall for the building, or do you want to create the firewall for the individual outlet, the spigot, the ice machine, pre-filtering RO for lab work? There's countless examples that we work on with people every day, where you either look at an approach like Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is saying, I want all three. I want point of entry on my buildings. I want point of use in these critical areas that we've identified. And then I want hot water as well. So anyway, that's what point of use offers you, is again, in a simple change out capsule where, recommended life should be somewhere between 9 and 12 months. So from a maintenance standpoint, it's really convenient. But to your point earlier, if for some reason you forget, if your team misses, someone's on vacation and they miss a sink, what will happen is that filter will slowly load, or you'll start to see a pressure drop, and you'll know to change it out. But you'll get that same level of protection
Hmm.
that the engineer designed for that critical part, whether it be a guest room, whether it be a cafeteria, sink in a school, or bottle filler, or ultimately a patient room in a hospital. And then the last area, and I'm going to say this one somewhat tongue in cheek, because nobody likes to give Scott McGee any credit, and I'm on that team now. I love him to death, but I think he invites it upon himself, just in terms of his delivery. But what we're doing now, and the key benefits of how we're utilizing force field on hot water return systems or recirculating loops, really we owe all the credit to Scott. And it was a project for you guys down there, 6400 fan in from Memorial Hermann. And the issue wasn't biofilm, the issue wasn't Legionella, the issue was simply brown water. They were frustrated, as with the fact that they couldn't combat an issue with brown water. They changed out their water heaters, and ultimately we looked at it. We did a water analysis. We realized that they had elevated levels of iron, which is extremely normal in most of the cities we work with in the US. And the reason why it wasn't an issue 10 years ago is they weren't heating the water as hot. And so now all of a sudden, because of water management programs, code concern, microbiological concern, right? We start heating our water up to an elevated level. Iron oxidizes out. Now you've got staining fixtures. You've got doctors complaining that there's dirty water in a patient room. And Scott McGee comes to the rescue. Puts a cape on, puts his boots on, and he shows up, and he actually, truth be told, he just used one of our water bottles. So I'm sure anybody who's seen us, we travel with these demos, but we've got water bottles that utilize a force field filter right in the top. And Scott McGee was able to take it to the next level. And so, Tim, I know you love this, so I brought it out for you today. So,
all right. First
literally,
live demo. I love
is it?
Yeah.
It's a shame. So I'll finish the story, and then I'll tell you what Scott did. So again, as everybody who's watching this knows, of everybody I work with, Cougar goes to extreme levels to service their contractors and their partners. They're not just a group that wants to sell you a pump. And Scott, all kidding aside, you know, he lives and breathes that. It's his DNA. And so the way I remember the story, and he could tell it differently probably, is he received the call because you guys represented a competitive hot water line then the team was frustrated with. And so they had tried switching out the hot water heaters thinking that was the culprit, and it wasn't. And so they, you know, they called up Cougar. Scott, you know, it was one of Scott's accounts. He was talking to him about their issues and said, look, maybe you should consider this line of filtration that we have. You know, it could help you. But let's take a look at it, right? Let's come out, let's take a look at it. And so what they did, which I thought was brilliant, is that they met early on a Monday morning after a long weekend, when the building would have been sitting not idle, but near idle, which is typically when you're going to see your issues in the hot water side, right? When the water sits in the system. And so they went to a room that they knew they were going to have issues with. Scott brought his water bottle, and they turned the faucet on. The water came out brown. Scott filled his water bottle up, and it was clean. And so we do this demo now. So I've got actually under my desk, just for full disclosure, because I love it, I keep dirty water.
Yeah, that is quite dirty.
So Tim, Scott goes into 6400 fan and meets the team early on a Monday morning, and they turn the faucet on, and the water comes out brown. And as it comes out brown, Scott fills up his water bottles, triple clear water bottle, and he goes ahead and shows live for the building engineer how easy it is to solve his brown water issue that he's been fighting for over a year. And so the demo we talk about all the time is how force field works. So I'll hold it up to the camera, but as you can see, with very little pressure, and we talk about just gravity, just a simple drip, you end up with crystal clear, totally safe and delicious water. And I've been criticized about coming off camera as I've done more of these presentations since COVID started. So I'll do a little bit of a juggling act so people don't think this is a little bit of smoke and mirrors. But ultimately, based off what Scott and the team was able to show, and now something that I travel with, we've created that problem solution that guys like your father and David Shepard up in New York were really challenging us on. And so what Scott did was exactly what we do on a regular basis. And as you know, it was very natural for him, which is, let me show you how great this is, and then let's come up with a solution. So obviously it was, you know, really good call to get, and the team was excited. But I would tell you that we at Triple Clear went completely down the wrong path. This is another example where it really takes collaboration and ultimately putting something in the real environment, putting it in a building, making it work, looking at why it worked, and then say, okay, well, what is this system? What is the package that we can now go share with other people to help them, right? Ultimately, our goal every day is to help you with your water needs. And so it's pretty straightforward. We looked at it and we said, wow, look, you guys got iron in your water. And like I mentioned, they're like, well, where'd it come from? You've always had iron in your water. It's okay. Right. But the world's changing, right? We're using so much less water in our buildings, which is a great thing, right? Think of the amount of products that you see on a plumbing schedule today that weren't there 5 or 7 years ago, that are strictly designed to help take the demand off the infrastructure. So these are good things, but that also means that the water's sitting in the infrastructure that much longer, sitting in your building longer, right? A couple of years ago, Marriott updated their standards, so they recirculate all their water too. Why would a hotel need to recirculate their water? Because they realized they needed to, because the water is sitting longer. So anyway, long story longer, we went in, we looked at the water, we said, okay, great. Here's your demand on your domestic water for the building. Let's size the system. I can't remember. It was probably somewhere between 400 and 500 gallons a minute. And let's put it in and let's get that iron out of the water, and they'll look at these other things we're doing by taking out your endotoxins and taking out your bacteria, virus, cysts, right? We're going to take the contributing factors, the biofilm out. All this stuff worked together, and we put together a package that was just way too expensive for the problem. On top of the fact, and this is, I would say that it was twofold. A, it was expensive, but B, we had to build it, and the lead time was like 14 weeks. And Scott's like, that's not going to work. You know, these guys have a problem now, and if we solve it now, will be heroes. If we don't solve it right now, they're going to find another way to solve it because their problem exists today. And so I don't know who gets credit for this, whether it's the building engineer or Scott, or for all I know, Tim, it was your idea. But
It wasn't
ultimately,
me.
well, you could take credit today because he's not
I'll
here.
take credit today. Sure. I'll take
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. But ultimately, they came back to us and they said, well, why don't we try just putting a simple system on the return line before the domestic water reenters the system? And we said, sure. We happen to have the vessels in stock. It was about 3.5 weeks from that conversation to when they were installed. Water problem solved within days, from my
Yeah.
understanding,
Yeah.
of
Very quickly.
of the system being installed. More importantly, which really meant a lot to us, those filters made it over a year without being changed. And after a year, so a year was January 4th, and I've told the story so many times, I know the date he installed it. So it was installed on January 4th, and obviously this year was a full year before they changed filters. Looking at that differential pressure, making sure everything was good, and the problem was solved for the building. So ultimately, we took that example, and that has become the design standard for Marriott for all of their buildings globally being built, because they're concerned about two factors. Obviously, they're concerned about their equipment efficiencies, like I mentioned, really concerned about Legionella in their buildings. And obviously the hot water side of, being domestic water, feeding a shower, it's a critical point. Same with Children's Hospital Philadelphia is putting on every one of their zones and every one of their buildings. And I've got countless other specs now that are going out that it was one of those just simple things where you looked at and go, why weren't I doing it? Why shouldn't I be doing it? Because of two issues, really. And it's a lot of brown water in the US now because of the factors I mentioned earlier, and a lot of concern about bacteria in the
Yeah.
water.
Yeah, I think in general, people are more aware of what's going on in their water, and are going to start asking those questions of where's this water coming from? How's it being
Yeah,
treated? You know, that
and it's not always that you see it.
right.
We I'll share it with the team when they want, but we did a road show last week in the Northeast, with a ASPE approved PDH presentation strictly
Hmm.
on brown water. And because I didn't have to get on a plane. It was interesting. I had I did this exact same demo with 3 bottles of water. One had high levels of E. coli. One was just pond water that had algae that smelled terrible. And one was iron like you see here. And in all 3 cases, right, when I would do the demo, brown water, oh my God, I would never drink that, right? The pond water, as soon as I would open the bottle, you'd smell it in a conference room. Oh no, I would drink that. E. coli, yeah, that looks fine. Which is the one that's going to make you sick?
Right. Yeah. The bacteria and the viruses, like you said, you're not going to see those. And
No.
I I think we've had a few events here in Houston over the last, say, 3 to 6 months that are, I think it's a little more top of mind here. You hear stories about Flint, Michigan, or Mexico, like you said, where people kind of know, hey, maybe the water quality here isn't the best. But in the city of Houston, our normal day-to-day water quality is actually pretty good from the city of
Yeah.
Houston in terms of the viruses, bacteria, all of those things, obviously, but the particulate, there's not a lot of particulate in the water. So, but there's that concern of a water main break like we had earlier this year, and an 8-foot line that serves half of the city, including downtown, broke. And all of a sudden we had a boil notice and low pressure and all of these, fears of getting bacteria in your building and having to flush. And the firewall filtration is designed for exactly that, right? It's going to be the sacrificial element that's going to, take all of that in and prevent it from getting into your building. So, I mean, obviously you may still want to follow the guidelines set out, but you're going to be at much lower risk than if you didn't have it. Right. And I think for the hospitals, it's a major concern. And even commercial office buildings, I mean, that's definitely a concern. The more and more that people are using the bottle fillers, like you said. So, combination of the point of entry, point of use, the bottle fillers, and the hot water return is definitely good applications for the triple clear. And there's others that we're seeing as well. Like I said, I mentioned, I have it personally at my house, and when that boil notice came on, we were able to keep drinking the water out of the triple clear filter. And
Exactly.
and we've also, I think there's been some some applications on the closed loops as well. Some places it can be applied there. So I mean, there's a lot of places. I mean, obviously water is used for pretty much everything in these buildings. So a lot of possibilities to use the triple clear in those different applications.
Yeah, and I think the closed loops are the closed loop pilots that we're in the middle of right now up in Illinois. They have me really excited. You know, they have me as excited as I was 2 years ago when we started down the path of bottle fillers and the retrofit filters, because
Hmm.
again, it takes me and it takes the force field media and exercises us into an area where we could really help. And it's an area that we didn't even look at. But Mike Fair is almost a year into two different pilots, one on chilled loop, one on condensing water, where he's side streaming. So the equipment isn't very big. The
Hmm.
media, it's not like you've got to put in a 1,200 or 1,800 gallon per minute system. You know, we're putting in 50 gallon per minute systems. We're pulling a side stream from it, and you're seeing an immediate reduction in iron, and more importantly, iron-eating bacteria, because the
Yep.
iron's in the water. But as you know, Tim, and I'm sure most of the people listening, once you end up with a bloom inside a closed loop, and it consumes through the iron in the water, the next thing it attacks is your equipment.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I didn't know to be excited about it, but between Mike Fair and Mike Zacharias, they've got me excited about it.
Yeah. And the other study he's doing is on the Legionella in the bottom fillers, correct? In water fountains.
Yeah, so he's got three key areas that he's focused on. Bottle fillers, which is we're concluded, so we started shipping that. Our pilot partner, Northwestern University, even though they're shut down as a result of COVID, they've already started switching out their filters with these little guys, the retrofit LK replacement filters, which also fit your Halls and Taylors.
Hmm.
So they've started on that. They've also started plotting a path for replacing equipment to our triple clear solution. And I know it might seem like a small point, but force field on its own is excellent at microbiologicals. It's very good at metals, like lead and arsenic, copper and iron. But we don't carry an NSF 53 on the media itself, which for school is critical. But if you upgrade, which Northwestern is putting a capital plan together to do, to our bottle fillers, it allows us to put two filters in series, which ultimately delivers a product that, in my opinion, is unmatched anywhere in the industry from a simplicity standpoint and obviously an execution standpoint. And so that's a critical part. The other area beyond the closed loops that I just mentioned that he being Mike Fair of Fair Solutions is just obsessed with is RO. So
Yep.
he manages a ton of processed water across the United States. Everything from obviously boiler makeup. So started at Northwestern University, they pulled water right off the lake for all their boiler makeup using RO. But Northwestern has 103 RO systems on campus.
Wow.
103, yeah. And what he's been able to find early on, and the data's still coming together, and we'll let Mike publish his data because he's a very independent person, which is why I love him, which is also why he drives me nuts. Because everything's, you deal with doctorates and scientific folk, they do everything on their own pace, at their own, not at their own leisure, but at their own pace. But ultimately, what they were finding is just like we talk about in commercial buildings with equipment and carbon filtration, is that it becomes a breeding ground for microbiologicals. So almost all of his RO systems would have a particulate filter on it, and then it would go through carbon and then into the RO membrane. And he was seeing in some cases those membranes, the life expectancy of the membrane being cut in half. So again, you look at triple clear, right? We were very, we started out as this aspirational company that wanted to eliminate bottled water. But when we looked at RO systems, we wanted to eliminate wastewater. So we wanted to make the system more efficient. And then we meet folks like your dad and ultimately Mike Fair, who say, that's all well and good. We'll get you there. But there's a real ROI here on the efficiency of the equipment and the cost of these membranes, where, in some cases, Mike has membranes that are fouling, at half life, which is incredibly expensive.
Yep.
And so the early data is really powerful because obviously we accomplished our goal, which is eliminating the discharge for the wastewater, because we're filtering that water and there's no discharge stream from our system, right? So we filter all the water. It comes in, it comes out, which is really, really good in this situation. But more importantly, we created a firewall, just like we talked about in
Hmm.
the examples earlier, before that membrane for the microbiologicals, which ultimately blinded and really degraded its life.
Yeah, there's a lot of applications for RO, and between the membranes and the reject water, like you said, that potentially huge savings for the operation cost.
It really is, and I take it a step further. Mike Fairlett is also um, highlighting a number of applications like that one at Hormel, which is a little bizarre and off the wall, where force field can be used in lieu of RO. So we fill this really big gap in the industry between filtering water to a good point and RO, which is pure water. And
Hmm.
because the media doesn't take out any of the minerals, we don't affect the pH, the water doesn't become aggressive, right? It's completely balanced. In a lot of cases, you just need better than good. And so you don't have to jump all the way to RO. So it's really, again, in the last 18 months, I think we've changed the trajectory to listening to our partners out there and then refocusing our attention on how force field can really help solve an everyday need, whatever that might be.
Sure. And I just like to go back to the bottle fillers real quick.
Hmm.
And, the not really a place that you would think about Legionella being an issue. So why is it that Legionella is growing there, and how can it be a concern if you're just drinking it, quote unquote?
Sure, sure. So let me take a step back, right? And start this story by saying it was brought to us through this independent consultant, Mike Fair and Fair Solutions. And it was an existing issue with Northwestern University, who were
Hmm.
open, we're obviously open to talk about that pilot and what happened. But through that whole process, nobody ever got hurt or sick, right? And so a lot of times when we talk about Legionella, it can quickly become a scare tactic, or there's a lot of fear involved with it, right? And people often look at cooling towers, mainly
Sure.
because that's where a lot of the publicity has always been. And more importantly, people often discount potable water concerns because you have to aspire, you have to actually breathe in the mist, right? For Legionella to turn into Legionnaire's disease, right? Which is
Hmm.
obviously a really strong form of pneumonia. Um, in the case at Northwestern, it was driven by public perception, but ultimately they uncovered a pretty fundamental flaw to the industry practice. And I would tell you, it goes much broader than just bottle fillers. So if you look at the way in which um, filters or media, are classified, we always jump to our NSF classifications, right? And 53 being a big one for drinking water, specifically focusing on lead. And so if you look at what we use, we being the industry, because we use carbon as well, we just don't use it independently like the industry does. Simple carbon filtration is extremely effective. Think about your refrigerator, think about
Hmm.
pitchers that have been around forever, right? And take it a step back and think about, well, why is it so effective, right? Because carbon is absorptive, right? Highly porous, really absorptive. And if you think about humans, like, we've evolved, right? I mean, you're a heck of a lot tougher than me. I'm not from Texas, right? But at the end of the day, like, if a bear came at us, right, we're probably not going to be able to protect ourselves, right? We've evolved as humans to protect ourselves with our sense of taste and smell, right? You grab the orange juice or the milk and you put it up to your mouth to drink it. If it smells terrible, you know not to drink it. Well, what's happening in there, right? It's bacteria, right? It just grows to a level that you see it. So come back to the Northwestern example, the industry, that top down, bottom up pressure, right? So as you have this general swell amongst a generation that is aging from elementary school, secondary, now into college, saying, look, I'm not going to drink out of that water fountain that's over there. Um, but I've got this Yeti and I want filtered water. So we ended up with bottle fillers, right? A simple solution. The industry reacts to it. And they put filters in there that are designed for drinking water standards, right? Carbon filtration, certified, designed, tested for drinking water standards. But if you go back to that absorptive principle or property of carbon, it's also what puts you in an area of risk. So if you ever looked at carbon under a microscope, Tim, it looks like a crumpled up piece of paper. Lots of nooks and crannies. It's like your Thomas English muffin, right? All those nooks and crannies.
Hmm.
Well, if you put that in a dark environment where that absorptive property is designed to take out things that give you taste and odor, which will make you not want to drink from the water fountain, i.e. your secondary disinfectant. That's what makes it taste like tap water, right?
Hmm.
You're taking that out, but you're not doing anything for the microbiologicals that we all universally, everybody, including your municipal water supply, agrees that there's safe levels of bacteria in your water. Well, what you're doing is you end up leaving those in, creating an environment for them to propagate. And that's what happened at Northwestern. So going back to the story, you had all this equipment installed all over campus, right? That was maintained properly, and that there were no signs of anybody getting sick. But what you had was a crazy professor. And literally, you had a professor, he was a law professor, and he was convinced that the university was poisoning them, lead poisoning, and he was going crazy. So, being a lawyer, right, being a law professor, he sued the university. And through that whole little interaction and all his medical bills, here to report he was not being poisoned by lead. The university was not doing anything wrong. He was just slowly going crazy on his own. I never met him. That's what I hear.
Sounds like a modern day Mad Hatter.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny things that come out of this story, and like anything else, who you talk to at the university have very differing opinions of this gentleman. But I can assure you, the engineering department, the facilities team, he's not on their list of friends. he was vocal, but through that process, right, there was a settlement, right, like everything, and he got taken care of. But as part of that settlement, Northwestern now had to take on some responsibilities. And if you think about it, fundamentally, when you walk up to that bottle filler, it doesn't guarantee that you've got safe water. It doesn't say the water you're drinking meets this criteria, right? It doesn't. All it says is it's filtered. So there's nobody, in my opinion, there's nobody doing anything wrong. It's just the evolution of a product, and you run into these situations, or the evolution of an industry, I should say. And you run into these situations where ultimately things are uncovered and you learn more, right? So fast forward, they had to hire this consultant to go about doing an audit on the entire campus, because they needed to be able to document for the case that the water was safe. So when they did their water screen and they tested all those bottle fillers and bubblers, which by the way was almost 500 between, it's the university. Well, Northwestern's Elverson campus is massive, but they also have a medical campus and hospital downtown as well. So between the two, almost 500 were audited, and over 37% of them tested positive for Legionella.
Wow.
As well as a number of them also tested positive for arsenic and lead. So what you end up with is fundamentally this collision, right? You end up with a pretty obvious concern. So if you step back and you say, well, we're going to design this, this is what we're dealing with, this is potentially an area of risk, and then you end up with that public light shining down on it. Northwestern had no choice but to make a pretty big decision. So then they further worked with the consultant and realized that after doing a bunch of testing, the only way to adequately keep those clean and safe of Legionella, because it was in the water and it was just collecting and becoming a breeding ground, was to disinfect obviously take apart and flush and disinfect the units and change the filters once a month. So Northwestern had 2 full-time people. And this was going on a year plus before they met us. And so we randomly met at a lunch and learn I was giving in Chicago at an engineering firm. I was focused on sustainability, honestly. It wasn't a broad, typical introduction to force field. But if you know Mike at this point, but anybody else who gets a chance to meet Mike Fair, he's an interesting fella. And he's funny, and I love him. I love his sense of humor. But ultimately, he raised his hand about halfway through my presentation and said, what I was saying was just not factual. And that's putting it politely. And so we did what we normally do, which is we worked with him, we shared with him the data, but more importantly, we gave him units to test. Just like we're talking about Scott doing at 6400 Fannin, just like
Hmm.
we talk about Hormel doing, or even, some of the VA projects. Let's get them in the environment, let you use it, let you feel confident that the result is what you need, and then we'll talk about how to design it. So same thing happened, and ultimately the results were phenomenal. We went through 3 phases of that pilot. Mike then extrapolated his research to all of his customers, and we found that the problem was universal, almost across the board where water was tested. So ultimately, we started with our normal point of use filter, Tim, that could be mounted externally to the bottle filler. As you can imagine, that solution was not acceptable to Northwestern. It just wasn't scalable. So like I mentioned a bunch of times during this podcast, our teams love to be challenged. And so I challenged my engineering team, and now we have a direct retrofit solution
Hmm.
for your Elkay and Halsey Taylor units, which was really special. So we manufacture those right here in the United States. So our filter media is made in Pennsylvania. We use an injection molding company in Ohio, and we assemble at our main factory up in Auburn, Maine. And so we're able to now really deliver a solution for those existing units. And like I mentioned, Northwestern is looking at transitioning to our triple clear solution for the equipment. But because we have this retrofit solution, now they don't have to spend, I know the number, it was $1.3 million in equipment just for bottle fillers, right? They don't have to spend that in one swing. They can go ahead and do it over the course of 5 years, 4 years, and really, really achieve 2 things, right? They can achieve an end goal, but more importantly, they can achieve an immediate goal, which is delivering safe water to their kids. Because like I was mentioning, one of the things that came about from our conversations with them is, even though the bottle filler itself doesn't guarantee a quality water, it doesn't say anything in terms of what you're drinking or how they're filtering it. But from a liability standpoint, as you think about it, if you're advertising, and as a building owner, there's responsibility there, right? If you're advertising that this is the place you go for filtered water, there is just a
An
simple
expectation,
understanding,
sure.
expectation. But from a liability standpoint, there's an understanding that water's going to be safe.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just mean like it's an expectation from the students or the tenants that water is
Exactly.
going to be safe, right? So
Yeah.
it's a really interesting application. And it's one that before we started talking about it, I didn't realize how many bottle
Yeah.
fillers and water fountains there are,
I
and
agree.
now I see them everywhere. Yeah, like I said, I mean, I've just really had an eye for the bottle fillers and water fountains, and we've had the triple clear installed at our office in our bottle filler for, I think it's over a year now, with no issues, and so it's nice to have that peace of mind when you go to refill your hydro flask there. So definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, and we've got them in stock too. So definitely something that we can start to ship if customers have the need.
It's
So.
dangerous. I'm a dangerous guy to know. Like, it's one of those deals that's, you don't ever want to talk to the chef who at the restaurant you love to go to, because they'll tell you about the kitchen. I tell you a little bit more than you want to know about water.
Yes, between you and Mike Farah is, definitely opened my eyes to what's actually going on in the water, or potentially going on in the water.
Yeah, but we'll
So,
help you out.
yep. So, kind of along the lines, you mentioned it already, not traveling as much due to COVID, and along the lines of Legionella concerns. How has COVID-19 and the reduced operation of buildings affected water quality, and how can Triple Clear help uh, offset those or mitigate them?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'd start by putting into the same category that we're putting COVID-19 into, which is we really don't know. Um, the difference is we're not talking about the, the, the issues of the virus being in the water. So what we're talking about, we can correlate to like examples. What we're talking about is just the sheer concern that a number of my partners have. And confidentially, I can't name all the partners, but I can assure you, if you're a big group and you manage a lot of buildings and they were shut down overnight, and in some cases are planned to be shut down for 60, 90 days. But more importantly, the infrastructure, the city, the environment, the town, it was brought down to its knees in terms of the water supply. So I've got really responsible partners that jump immediately into a regular flushing protocol for the building engineers to try to keep water moving through the buildings. But if you think about it, the water you're moving through the building now has been sitting in the infrastructure longer than it ever has before. Because in a lot of these cities, with the exception of residential and hospitals, there isn't a lot of demand on the actual water supply. And so as we've looked at it, the one example that comes up that a lot of the people I trust and a lot of the really smart people in our industry are correlating it to in a more recent example, right? Because we've all got examples of buildings being shut down and turning them back on. But we're more talking about taking an actual supply, demand and supply scenario, bringing it to its knees for a long time, and then looking to turn it right back on again. And that's Flint, Michigan. And so as crazy as it might sound, Tim, and this blew me away when I started talking about it about 6 weeks ago, Flint, Michigan was back in 2014. Like,
Really?
isn't that insane? Like when they started
Wow.
realizing the issues in Flint, 2014, and there's a lot that goes into the issues in Flint. But what we're talking about is we're not talking about those issues.
Hmm.
What we're talking about is them bringing the city or bringing the supply back on. So as crazy as it might sound, right? They did a lot of things, and there's a lot. We can spend 2 podcasts talking about what happened in Flint, Michigan. But ultimately, where things really, in my opinion, correlate to what we're talking about today in all of our major municipal and city supply scenarios is more along the focus of 2016 and 2017. So here you had this extended period of time where people were told not to use the water. People were told to stay away, similar to what we're talking about now, right? In these major areas, right? But then they did a bunch of changes externally, right? I'm just summarizing it. Obviously, not there's a lot of complexity to it, but from a simple standpoint, they did a bunch of changes and they said, "Listen, public, now the water's safe. We've learned our lessons. You should be confident that this water is good for your family." And what happened next was the largest documented outbreak of Legionella in U.S. history. Scary. And it's
Wow.
right back to our examples that we were talking about with firewall filtration and biofilm and all these things. Like, we could talk all day long about the good things we're doing in cities to reduce our water consumption, right? And the demand of these buildings. And then you're taking it down. Like, look at a commercial office building in downtown Houston, 20 stories, right? And you went from, I don't know, it would be staggering to know the amount of water they would use in a week. Is it safe to say that even with proper process in place to flush the building, that the demand is down to maybe 2% of what 5%? I mean, that's where I guess I'm saying we don't know,
Hmm.
but we can look at examples where very strong outside influences have forced us to pull the supply down, pull the demand down, excuse me, and then ultimately look to just reopen them up. And so it's not just hotels, and it's certainly not just schools. It's really every part of our city. We need to look at what's the best way to flush the building, which I think I mentioned earlier. We partnered with Fair Solutions to distribute just as a public service. It's just a recommendation, but it's a really smart recommendation in terms of how to get your building back
Yep.
online step by step. And within that, looking at how you could really ensure so that we don't run into the same issue that happened in 2016, 2017 in Flint, which was we're going to go in and say, okay, well, we flushed the building. Now it's safe to drink the water, when there's unknowns. We're in a world of unknown. And that's why we've taken it a step further, saying, yes, long term, You mentioned it a couple of times during this podcast. If you had that firewall, if you had point of entry, whether it be a water main break, whether it be as simple as someone needing to flush a hydrant, down the street, or whether it be something like a global pandemic, bringing your city down, your building will be protected. In this particular case, you hear the statement all the time about the horse getting out of the barn and then shutting the door, right? Ultimately, in this particular case, we should look to that for the next round. But in the short term, just like our hospitals do every day with their water management program, what we're doing is we're literally looking at the DNA, the usage profile of each building. What type of building is it? Who's there? What does your road to recovery look like? Do you have, or 80% of your tenants doctors, or 80% of your tenants engineers, or 80% of your tenants lawyers? Talking to them, okay, well, are you in New York City, for an example? When we look at New York City, you're looking at maybe over the next 6 months, employers being able to bring back physically together 25% of their staff. So that even though we're now bringing that building back online, now you're
Not to
looking
full
at that
capacity,
from
sure.
exactly, and that's the whole city. So anyway, long story longer, as we like to say. What we're doing is we're looking at lessons that we could learn from, and thinking about where in a building we need to create the firewall so that people can confidently come back to work, confidently come back to these areas, and ultimately know, as a building owner, as an engineer, as just a person who wants to help everybody come back together again, that there's safe water. So I just did an exercise for a building development company that I can't say who they are, but I can tell you they're in New York City. And for one building, the initial scope was almost 90 point of use filters. And it was like, whoa, like
Wow.
that's a lot. And how do we get teams in there? But just like our hospitals are doing, we took a step back and we looked at the tenant profile. We looked at the nature of one building, and we said, you know what? As a tenant, do you think your employees would be okay if there was a bottle filler that had a force field filter every other floor versus the 6 that are on every floor? Do you think it's safe to say, okay, well, look, we're gonna bypass, we're gonna ignore the bottle filler for now, and we're just gonna put a point of use filter and a new spigot in the kitchen, in the
Right.
cafeteria kitchen, right? And when you walk to get your lunch, that's the place to go get water. And so that's like, I guess that's kind of where we're going, because as we don't know what the path forward is, and we know that it's going to be a gradual path for so many of our partners, it's really looking at it going, okay, well, what are the things we could do right away, so that we could make sure that when it becomes time, whether it be 2 weeks from today or whether it be 2 months from today, for depending upon the region you're in, that
Hmm.
people start to come back together. Universities, we talk about potentially, confidentially, potentially, um, staying with remote learning through the
Right.
holidays, like all the way through the fall. So then you're looking at a dormitory that might be closed for a calendar year almost by the time it gets opened back up. Um, and then what happens, right? And so um, I think when we look at COVID, I think that there's, again, a lot of very smart people in our industry that have published very, very strong, independent, independently sourced, independently developed papers that will take you through what the concerns are. And ultimately, we feel that because of the sheer nature of which force field works, and the environment we work in, how we work, it's a really, really good solution. One of the things I'd recommend, I know it's a little bit of a side, but I'll share with you a study that was just published in early April by Purdue University.
Okay.
A lot of really, really good information. We should definitely, I'll share with you that checklist I mentioned from Fair Solutions.
Hmm.
And then there's just some interesting articles that you could read, both from here in Europe, that really kind of outline where the concerns are and what a path forward safely can look like.
And it's, I mean, it's not just a hypothetical at this point. either, though. I mean, there's already been confirmed cases of, buildings where they found Legionella, um, it, because of the reduced occupancy or whatever it was, and you have, and I think in that case it was a retirement home, and those are that group of people already maybe immune compromised and would be, um, the concern for Legionella or Legionnaire's disease anyway, and then you throw potential COVID-19 on top of it, and it just creates a potentially really bad situation for them. So,
Yeah.
um,
And there's also, you could just go ahead and ask Uncle Google if you want to. But there's some very, very early studies that you're seeing out of the Pacific Northwest, which obviously was an area that was on the forefront of the
mhm.
pandemic here in the States, um, where they're going back and they're looking at some tissue from confirmed fatalities of COVID, and it's a little scary because there's a fairly significant percentage of those people also had Legionnaires,
Oh wow.
and so again, that's why we are nowhere near ready to start putting those dots connected together. And you know me for 2.5 years now, maybe more. It's one of those things where we really, myself and my team, really really encourage you to research, find your own thing. But ultimately, it ties back to, not to always tie things back to the product, but ultimately it ties back to that firewall.
Hmm.
And we talk about it all the time. Water can be very inconsistent. And unlike UV or chlorine or ozonating, when you're looking at treating water for bacteria concerns or microbiologicals, whether it be a virus or bacteria, because Legionella is bacteria. But we also take viruses out of water, which is scary too. It's something we don't
Hmm.
talk a lot about. But and obviously COVID is not a waterborne virus, but there are waterborne viruses out there that you could do some research on that will probably add to your anxiety about drinking
Yeah.
water. But ultimately, if you think about it, whether it be a hurricane, a global pandemic, whether it be just simply a fire hydrant from being dumped in the street, you have the ability to ride this inconsistent wave and create a firewall for a single sink or a whole building. And and that's really where we're at now, is working with our partners to say, okay, let's look at your portfolio, let's look at your buildings, and even our hospitals that haven't been shut down. They're still in cities where the water quality has changed dramatically because the demand in the city has come way down. And so I had a really long conversation with the engineers at CHOP about that, who are running. I mean, they're running around the clock, full bore through this whole thing, but yet we're starting to see the water quality change in the city of Philadelphia just because the city has been shut down now for a month and a half.
Yeah, and Texas has been, I would say, one of the more aggressive states in the plans to open back up, and so here we're already starting to see some of that phased approach of opening back up that you mentioned, and but other places it may be even longer schedule. So, kind of along those lines, what advice would you have for property and facilities managers in the next 30 to 90 days as they're trying to get these buildings back opened up?
Sure. My advice is always the same. It starts with a good plan, right? I mean, how many times can you say that, the plan may not have worked, but you don't typically fail if you have a plan, right? So it's pretty straightforward. You really need to look at your building, and it's a building by building exercise. And we're home now, and a lot of people have extra time, but I'm doing a lot more one-on-one or one-on-two Zoom presentations with groups where we're specifically focusing on a building or a couple buildings, um, and looking at. So first is looking at your portfolio, building by building, where they are in the city, the history of them, how old they were, when they were designed. Do you have a history of testing on the building? Have you had a history of mechanical failures? Let's really try to understand what you're doing, and then understanding the tenants. You know, is it commercial real estate that we're equally concerned about, where people have been home and they're using all their water like they normally would, but they can't get out on a regular basis. And the delivery companies, is delivering their water, but leaves it downstairs, and do we have the ability to put in point of use filters? So just like you talked about with little Joey, now you've got safe water in your kitchen,
Mm.
and then looking at it, like I mentioned, the exercise on commercial office space. I think that's a critical one because we're going to really want people to come back comfortably. We've talked to a few restaurants as they've looked at the fact that they're going to be opening their kitchens back up, and in their particular case, it's a heightened awareness, right? It's really
Yep.
responsible Americans that want to make sure that they're educating themselves and doing their due diligence to open back up correctly, safely, in the right time frame. So again, simple answer is starts with a really good action plan, and in the short term, the simple answer is point of use. I would tell you in some cases, looking at your domestic hot water would be secondary, and then long term would be, if it makes sense, upgrading to a point of entry system so that you're better prepared for the next time this happens. And again, I'm reading and watching the same news you are, but it's potentially 9 months away. We might be shutting our cities back down this winter, and we have an opportunity to prepare these buildings not only for the short-term wave of employees coming back or guests coming back, residents, being at home for extended periods of time, but then do we have a long-term strategy in place to
Sure.
make sure that we're better prepared for who knows what potentially might come next. But simple answer is an action plan.
No, I think that's great advice. And I think, whether it's consumers for a restaurant or tenants in a building, I think there's going to be an expectation from them to kind of know what that business or that company is doing to make the environment more safe for them, amid all of the potential dangers of COVID. So to have that plan, the checklist that you've mentioned, and to be able to put that action plan in place and then to share it to give those people a peace of mind, I think is going to help that transition be smoother to getting back to what is our new normal.
And it's really, I think that last part you mentioned is as important as anything we do to get to it, which is how do we communicate confidently with our friends? I mean, in the majority of these cases, right? Our building engineers have been working, with their tenants for a long time, and their families know each other, and that's the part that I think not to get too emotional, like it warms your heart as you see Americans helping Americans,
Mhm.
and it's not, it's not a, hey, we got to open up because it's let's open up, but at the same time, like each one of us does our part in helping each other, we get to the finish line that much quicker, and we get to the finish line as a team. And so the groups we've been talking to, it's been really refreshing because it's not necessarily a, well, why do this or why do that? It's okay, well, that's a good point. But in this particular building, this is what we're dealing with. Okay, well, in that particular building, let's try that. And it's no different for, a elementary school in the Pacific Northwest that we're working with on what a plan might look like for schools to come back. Talk to some school districts, some states that are considering starting the academic year earlier, um,
Mhm.
in the summer, starting the academic year earlier in the summer so that they're prepared for potentially a shutdown in the winter months, kind of flipping summer vacation with winter vacation. But in all these cases, you've got really, really smart, caring individuals that are looking at trying to educate themselves so that their action plan is one that they feel like covers the bases.
Yeah, that there's been a few silver linings to come out of this pandemic, and I think people coming together and showing how much they care or that they want to get things kind of back and going in a safe way, like you said, is definitely one of them.
It really is, and it's no different for a manager and an employee as it is for a building owner, building engineer, and a tenant. I really do feel like at this point, the vast majority of everybody's relationships have grown to the point. Um, again, like my story with Andrew early on, regardless of your green socioeconomic status, I mean, you name it, we've all gone through this together.
Hmm.
When this thing started with poor Tom, I say poor Tom Hanks. I mean, in your lifetime, did you ever gonna feel bad for Tom Hanks? Like, what a killer life, killer career, really
Yep.
great family, awesome man. Affected,
Yep.
you know, affected right down to the, to, we've lost not family members, but friends. And I know a number of people that have been affected. And, it's just, it's one of those things where I think it's very humbling, but it's also one that, to your point, I think is going to bring us together and come out with hopefully a much stronger respect for one another.
Yeah. Well said, sir. Completely agree.
I got a little
So
soft on you. Sorry.
that's good. So, as we kind of wrap up here, any final thoughts on anything that's been going on or anything else you'd like to share?
I think we covered a lot, Tim, and I think I would hope it's very valuable for all your partners who we're getting to know. You guys have obviously done an incredible job helping people and ultimately building trust. And I know we've really welcomed the partnership with Cougar, and more importantly, see an opportunity in the Houston market to again, I've used the word a number of times, to really exercise force field and come up with solutions that are special. And we're just looking forward to doing more of it. Certainly looking forward to getting back down for some barbecue. And more importantly, I was again turned down for my request to go to the rodeo this year. And so at some point, I would think a guy from Pennsylvania should be allowed to come to the rodeo, even for a night. Just saying.
Yep. We'll
Just
definitely
saying.
get you into the rodeo. Yeah.
That's
Get
what
you
you
some
say
proper
every time.
barbecue. I know.
Never.
And hopefully
You
next
know what I hear? I
year.
hear your stories about going to the rodeo.
Yeah.
I
We'll
want
get you
my
down
story.
early. We'll go to the barbecue cook-off, get you some proper barbecue, and then stick around for the opening of the rodeo. So,
That's a deal.
but we're sitting here talking about people coming together and doing incredible things during the pandemic, but forgot to even mention, how Triple Clear has pivoted and has started providing masks.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and I thought that was a great example of how companies are kind of adapting and helping in a way that's kind of unrelated to what you do. I mean, now we're talking about filtering air and not water, but that helped us. We needed masks and gave us a way to get them, so we appreciate that.
Thanks. Yeah, I was kind of mentioning to you guys, to you before we started, that I had to shoot that video over the weekend, and um, it wasn't necessarily in my comfort zone. But like any good employee, I got told to do it. so so there I was out in the driveway with my wife on Saturday, shooting a video. But to me, just real quick, Tim, this story is so much more than just Triple Clear. It's so much more than just guys who really want to deliver safe and delicious water. Um, we've got a team of engineers. We've got a team of partners behind us, that they're just observant, and they have this incredible attitude. And so early on, our team, just saw a need, and one of the key engineers up in Maine saw a need, and realized that one of our water filter materials was FDA approved for filtering air, for and we were able to repurpose it. Worked with the University of Maine on design. That the first time I saw it, I actually have one on my desk here. So the first time I saw it, I thought it was a little weird, but it has these little ear holes, if you could see.
Hmm. Yeah, it
Um,
makes it universal size.
it makes it universal size, but now that we've gotten 30 plus thousand of them out into people's hands, the feedback we're getting is consistent, which is what the vision was, is that it's easy to wear, right? It makes it easy to breathe because it's a face shield, right? So we're not building a mask or ventilator, right? It's just a face shield that's designed to keep your droplets to yourself and keep other droplets away from you.
Sure.
So highly effective, but just the way it fits, um, and the fact that that it's so effective, we've gotten some cool feedback on it, and it's just something our team did to really help. And when you hear those stories, the best stories you hear are, we've got a team working in a warehouse where you've got people now taking them home for their families, and
Hmm.
not so much that they're there working every day and they appreciate that we can get them some masks so that they're safe while they're there, but when they return home, they're protecting their families. And yeah, it's just I I didn't think to mention it, but it's been a pretty cool way for us to stay involved and try to do our part.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's a great example of companies kind of pivoting and that American ingenuity. And I mean, really, you don't want to limit that to Americans. It's been happening all over the globe. I mean, I was talking with uh, David McMillan from Grumpfoss, and they've done some similar things as well. But it's great to see people coming together, using what they have available to help the situation. And like you said, didn't even think to mention it. So obviously doing it for the right reasons there. So much appreciated.
Happy to.
Awesome. Well, Patrick, look, I really enjoyed the conversation today. I think we
Okay.
covered an extremely broad range of topics, but I always love hearing the story of how you got into the industry and how Triple Clear started. Again, just a great story of American entrepreneurial. Maybe that's not the right word to use. That's a tough.
Oh, it's the right word. You just don't want to say it.
It's a hard one.
Forget about spelling it.
Entrepreneurialism. There you go. So yeah, like I said, love hearing the story of Triple Clear and how it started. Just a great story, and to see the growth of the company to where it is today, offering solutions for very specific issues in buildings, and even how that's applied to COVID. Again, great talking with you, and love having you on the show.